There's no gold stars there, dude.
But we have red stars, blue stars, green stars, and silver stars. Thank you, Magnus. What color star would you like for your relay activity?
Don't say gold.
Don't say gold. Green coming.
Okay, but now that we've dealt with the easy thing, we do need one more minute taker, please. I see a wall of notebook computers staring at me.
Did we get somebody for me to hand a silver star to? All right, thank you.
Check sound.
There we go. Welcome everyone to the IETF 92 first session of Rtcweb, where we hope to be far more boring than you've seen us in the past. We're going to be trying to get a lot of stuff done today, so please help us out and focus your comments as much as possible as we go through the doc reviews that are coming up. Before we begin all that, though, we have a question for you. Have you read and seen and noted well the Note Well?
You're very hard to hear in the back.
This is the time where you get to note well that all your contributions to the IETF are covered by the documents which are noted here. RFC 5378 and RFC 3979 contain all the details. Read them, enjoy them, and welcome to the IETF.
So I want to just quickly talk for a second about where we are on a bunch of our documents. There's this depths draft, which just has a list of all our dependencies and status of them. Please send corrections to it. Next slide, please. So the good news is about 50% of our normative dependencies are RFCs or in pub request. So that's a big difference from last time. There's one there, like the security arch, that's in pub request that will probably come back out of pub request. That's why it has a star, and that may be the fate of some of the other ones as well. But I mean, we're making good progress here. So next slide. This is a lot of stuff that is still in progress that we normatively depend on. Maybe a few mistakes on here, but we've tried to get it mostly right. There's quite a bit of stuff in quite a few different groups. When we go and check on those, most of them are moving along. One of the ones, next slide, that I want to draw attention to at some point is we have this dual stack fairness draft. It's probably one of the drafts that it's still an individual item, and because of how its timing interactions might interact with ICE, that one could be a very long pole in the tent. I think people should probably we should probably think about that one a little bit and keep an eye on it, decide what we want to do on it. But that was the only one that sort of caused a real, concern on wondering when it would be done. So, any questions on any of those ones of where we are?
So, Keith Drage, which slide is the gateways on?
So that was not on there. It is not a normative dependency of the current WebRTC, of the current APIs from W3C.
Right. Well, I would stress that it is a normative dependency of some 3GPP documents that are trying to use Rtcweb. So we would like it to be carried forward.
Okay. Send me a comment. I'll take your draft on that. I didn't realize that. Thank you. And please do send me a comment on that. So thanks, Chuck.
Justin Uberti, just a comment on the dual-stack fairness that because of some of the rules we've adopted in transports regarding which v6 addresses are used, I don't think the problem is quite as dire as is described in the draft. And so it may not actually become like a critical thing to resolve for Rtcweb itself because we're limiting ourselves to a specific set of allowed v6 addresses.
Super. Okay, Eric.
So, here. So, I'll be doing this without slides because slides are silly. So the security architecture document has a requirement on the W3C specification that well, the security architecture document describes the conditions under which persistent permissions grants can be given to get user media, and the first thing it says is you can only give persistent permissions grants under HTTPS, and the second thing it says is that there must be, it levies a mandate on the Get User Media API, and there needs to be an affordance where the Get User Media API asks for persistent permissions. Otherwise, you have to grant temporary permissions and not persistent permissions. Now, no browser that implements Get User Media does this, and there's no. So first of all, no browser does this, and second of all, the Rtcweb API does not contain any affordance for doing so. I'll briefly describe what Chrome and Firefox, both Chrome and Firefox do. So Chrome basically grants ephemeral permissions if you are an HTTP URL and permanent permissions if you're HTTPS origin. Firefox grants temporary ephemeral permissions if you're on HTTP, and if you're on HTTPS, it gives you the option with some basically invisible drop-down of selecting permanent permissions, though we're probably going to make that drop-down easier to see at some point because we get a lot of people complaining that like they're tired of being prompted in Firefox and not Chrome. So the question came up, the question on the mailing list raised by me actually. Should we simply update the WebRTC API to have this affordance, or alternately should we remove this requirement in the security considerations document because it is silly to have a requirement which, like right now, which the WebRTC API doesn't comply with. So this morning, Martin, Justin, and I sat down and talked about this and came to the conclusion that what we should do is modify the IETF document to remove this requirement, and probably at some point we'd come up with some set of some software guidance that could probably go in the WCC document about basically either asking the user whether they want persistent permissions, or conversely telling them, oh, by the way, this is persistent if they get persistent, but having some user notification or consent.
Yeah. So, Martin Thompson, to expand on that just a little bit more, I've had some discussions with other people at Google as well on the general topic of how permissions are managed in browsers, and it's kind of an important topic to have a bit of a handle on. The basic principle that needs to apply to the standards that we write, whether it be here or the W3C or wherever it is, that we have agreed upon at least at that level, is we need to have some sort of flexibility with respect to how the individual browsers present security UX, whether that be because they have a different way of communicating with their users, different security posture in general, or they want to be able to experiment in various ways with how they present security UX and manage permissions and all those sorts of things. So we want that flexibility to be present. And at the same time, we do want to have the APIs permissive of variations in the security UX at the same time. So that's the agreement that we've more or less bilaterally come to, which suggests that there needs to be less strict guidance in specifications. Now that said, we do hope that we can come to some sort of arrangement with respect to how we present the UX that won't lead to this weird fracturing of the landscape where people have to understand that in Firefox it's a door hanger, in Chrome it's an info bar with the following properties, and so on and so forth. So we're continuing that discussion. I think we made some pretty good progress.
So I know Wendy does not necessarily agree with this, with the proposal that I just made, but before she gets up, before she speaks, I want to make the point that we need to do something here. Either we need to either we need to go send a message, to ourselves in our Get User Media capacities to change Get User Media, or we need to remove this section, because right now we have a contradiction which we can't have.
This is Wendy Seltzer, W3C, and I primarily wanted to invite people who are interested in the permissions question to join us in the W3C Trust and Permissions community group, where we're trying to bring people together to think about, if not recommendations, at least best practices for harmonizing the ask for permissions, persistence of permissions, what do they look like, and how can a user who moves among various user agents understand what that looks like. So we recognize that we haven't gotten uniformity to date, but are trying to provide forum to get closer to that point.
Great. So Wendy, before you go away there, I mean, we've heard from two browser vendors here. So you as sort of representing the concerns of users of these types of systems, I mean, would you want to see our specs say that people need to be able to say, I want to only give this permission one time? Because right now, basically, you have to give it permanently, and if you grant it at all, it's nearly impossible to remove, right?
That isn't quite true either.
Okay.
So there's no way to give a temporary permission in Chrome at all. In Firefox, you default as temporary, even on HTTPS. I'm not going to argue it's impossible to remove.
So I put that highly controversial, of course. But I mean, I think the question is whether we should say something on this or not, from a privacy point of view, is what it comes to.
From a user privacy perspective, I would want to see an option to turn it off, whether it's an option to grant a temporary permission, or an option to go into your settings later and revoke permissions, because just because you one time wanted to experiment with a site access to media doesn't mean that you always, or under all browsing contexts, want to grant that.
Yeah. Every browser does support that, though, as you say, the interfaces for that may be Rococo. It does exist.
Hi, hello, this is John. Speaking with my W2C hat on, I think. And just to reframe the discussion a little, this is not about how the browser and the user interacts with regards to permission. It's about how the JavaScript and the browser interacts.
Largely, but it might be. I mean, so when I wrote this text, I had the idea in my head, I think, that the browser might present two different permissions prompts, like the browser's permissions prompt for permanent. So you remember Adam Barth had this paper called Prompting the User Security Failure, right? And the idea was that users go task focused and click through everything. And so the idea was that it might be acceptable when the user asks for a temporary permission to give them a very invasive dialog, which really is modal, and when they ask for permanent permission, to make it a door hanger so that they weren't quite so forced to make it harder for sites to force you into permanent permission. Nobody does this. And so in that case, it would be a flow through from the JavaScript to the browser to the user. So that's why I sort of was resisting your comment a little bit.
So the reason I go on about this is, of course, because I'm responsible for the group that has to say something in the API. And the API does not allow JavaScript to tell the browser whether or not the permission should be permanent.
That's correct. We would have to modify the API.
I was looking through the cases and found that I could do this with our dearly beloved constraints, and actually argue successfully for about 6 different postures that the JavaScript could ask for, and where a lot of the constraints mechanisms actually made sense. So it may be easy to do. The question is whether, and not slow things up a lot. The question is whether we need to do it, whether it makes sense to do it, given that at this present stage in experimentation, absolutely nobody has asked for it.
To be clear, I'm arguing for removing this text from the IETF draft and leaving the get user media draft as is, modulo whatever other faults it has, which we'll have to fix later. So, I mean, I guess my question is, anybody think that we should not do what I just said, namely remove this particular levy, not the HTTPS levy, but solely the levy about API control. Would you like to stay in the box?
Oh, sure, I'll stand in the box for a second. Ted Hardy, as an individual, I'd like to suggest a friendly amendment, and that is to basically do what you said, but call attention to the fact when the change is made that there are still going to be mechanisms in the browser settings for doing this, and that further work on creating more or a less Rococo affordance, in some other phrase, will take place.
Okay. Would you like that to have any 2119 normative language, or merely just
Advisory? No, I do not want 2119.
Okay, great. Going. Oh, please.
So, Keith Drage, has this actually been raised on the list?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's no list.
Okay, I'm just trying to remember back, because I mean, I do want to make sure the community outside who's in this room gets aware that this has been discussed, because there's no slides. How do they actually get?
This was raised on the list about 2 weeks ago, I think, on both Rtcweb and get user media, or sorry, media capture lists. So I think it only ended up on media capture.
Just Wendy Seltzer again. One other potentially relevant W3C group, the Web Application Security Working Group, has a permissions item in its latest charter looking at what access applications should have more generally to permissions.
Quite so.
So I hope we'll be of some help.
So Ted Hardy again, this time in chair role, although the same box. A question to the group here. We obviously need to take this back to the list because we had gone through working group last call, and we will take this question back to the list. At the moment, the chairs are believing that we can ask this focused question. Does anybody believe that we need to reopen it as a full working group last call? Okay. Given that Magnus.
Sorry. Yeah, I start with my own comment, and I go get the computer. The question, I think, to answer that question is depending on the other changes that's maybe needed to this document. It's not, I mean, there are more changes I think is needed, so I think it's a premature question.
So in effect, we have already finished the working group last call.
Yes.
And taken it up. We are asking if we need to claw it back, and your answer to that is yes, but not on this basis, some other basis. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't you go get the computer and we'll see what the Jabber had to say.
I can pass it. So the Jabber message, this is from Paul Kezevet. He says, as a browser user, I want the ability to choose one-time or persistent.
So, right, I mean.
So noted, but realize that from what Harold said, you're actually saying, do you want the JavaScript to be able to choose that for you, right? And that's a very different question given the state of the art where we are now.
Right, I mean, there could be some mandate somewhere in some specification that said that browsers must offer users the alternative of doing temporary versus permanent. I'm not sure how happy people would be about that, but that would be a different argument to make than the one that we currently have.
Justin Uberti. So yeah, that's just like a sort of implementation question for the browsers. Like what I heard talked about earlier is like, should there be some API where the JavaScript could say, hey, I want to get this permanently or temporarily, and I kind of feel like I don't know any site that would say I only want it temporarily. I mean, like maybe like there are some specific use cases, but I think that's probably not a solution to this issue.
Yeah, I mean, unless we punished you for some way asking for permanent, right? And we're not going to.
Okay, so Magnus has argued that we need to take it back to a full working group last call. So what I'm going to suggest we do at this point is that we're going to ask the focused question. Magnus, you raised the other issues on the list, and we'll see if in that context we need to go back through a working group last call. But this will obviously pull back out of its current state with the AD at this point. Does Since we started with the state of the document slide, the little star is now resolved into moving it out of the pub requested state. Not before time. Give us a second. So we're going to
talk about the
get the
initiative.
slides that he sent us, but in the meantime, please go ahead and get.
It actually works good. So Bernard rather sagely had noted the huge block of text in the security architecture that says bracket, bracket, open issue in capitals, that somehow made it through working group last call.
We wanted the IETF to do that part.
Yeah, RFC editor, fix it for us, please. Just, you know best. So that section is in a section on API requirements and various other things that we've more or less agreed to in the past. And the rest of the section is, I think, fairly non-controversial. This stuff as it relates to screen sharing, and I apologize for the size of the font, that's just terrible. You can go and find the security architecture. It still hasn't been removed. But this basically levies some more requirements on browsers with respect to screen sharing. It says that you can't have permanent permission grants for access to screen sharing. You must always prompt separately for screen sharing, which I think is one thing that Firefox intends to willfully violate. So I think that's probably advisable anyway. And you must provide some sort of feedback that particular applications or the entire desktop are being shared. And I think this is something that probably will happen in some form or other, but as I already noted, there are implementations of this out there, and those implementations don't follow the guidance particularly strictly. And at this point, I'm going to suggest it's a little premature to do this. So this is my proposal. The work's been done in the W3C. Most of the security considerations as it relates to this particular topic aren't network security problems. They relate to how screen sharing interacts with the browser security model and the same origin sandbox. And that expertise lives in the W3C. It probably requires, again, liaison to this web AppSec working group that I keep hearing about. So I'm going to propose we defer to that work. That just means that we take the hat off and I take responsibility for it on the other end because I'm editing that work. So we remove the text in this document. All of the scary warning stuff goes away, but we do add a note saying that screen sharing is out of scope for this document, essentially. And a little note on the tail of that saying, well, but we do know about some security problems, so there may be some additional requirements on APIs as a result of this, and there may be some additional requirements on implementations as a result of this. But we're not going to go into the details at this point.
All right, Justin Huberty, where will the scary text live if it's removed from this document?
So there's the media capture screen share document that's been taken on by the W3C, one of the many heads of the RTC stuff.
Okay.
I don't know. I think that's been adopted now. There's
Yeah,
a first
it has
public
a
working
first
draft
public,
of that
yeah.
one. There's text in there for that. It covers a lot of exactly the same sort of considerations. It currently leaves probably far too much flexibility for implementations with respect to the UX side of things, and gives a fair amount of control on the API side of things. We may want to discuss exactly how much flexibility we want in one particular dimension and the other, but that's work that can continue there is my...
Right. I mean, the main reason I'm asking is that a lot of people are unconvinced by, hey, why does screen sharing require an extension? Isn't that less sensitive than your camera? and like being able to point at the text that's in the security document has been very helpful. So as long as they live somewhere, I just want that same scenario and everything to be like documented.
So the security architecture only has the levies on requirements. So it actually describes the implementation of the stuff that's in the security draft, which contains that entire section that we found so useful in the past,
Okay, so
explaining
that was-
exactly what the threat model is and all those sorts of other things. There's a replication of that text in the W3C document.
Okay,
But,
fantastic.
you know, we now have 2 places to point out if we need it. But yes, I totally agree that the number of times I've had to explain this to someone, probably 7 or 8 times usually, the text helps me get rid of the first 4 or 5 iterations of that explanation. So it's been quite useful to have.
So Keith Drage, just to note that the bit that says but some additional requirements might apply, I don't think makes sense. When you publish this RFC, you are stating this is the requirements at a point in time, and presumably at that point there are no requirements. What
Correct.
you might be saying is that at some point in the future you may develop some requirements in this area, but that is not what you've written there.
Don't take the text that I have on this slide, which was written in a screaming hurry, to be at all indicative of what actually makes it into the draft. I'm sure that we can wordsmith on the list in that respect. And yes, point well taken. We're not actually going to put any requirements in here. We actually want to say that we're going to punt, effectively. That's another reason to pull it back. Is a suggestion. Yeah, I think we can sort this out pretty quickly and then have another last call. Though there may be concerns that Magnus has. Did you want to discuss some of those things, Magnus, or is it not?
Well, I
is
think
now
it
not
would
the
be
time?
good, because I actually went over all of the discussion that occurred in working group last call, and there were actually quite a few things, and maybe they don't deserve to be in the security document, but there were things like the required hashes to support inserts. Justin asked that question. It didn't end up anywhere as far as I know. There were all kinds of discussions about support things, whether we support things like session resumption, DTLS, or renegotiation, and those have been floating around in MMusic, but those didn't end up anywhere. And then this. So that's kind of my question, is all this stuff floating out there about security, and none of it, which came after the working group call, none of it ended up in the document.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if
So
it is
just
or not.
I got a proposal here for how to deal with this. Why don't we put this, why don't we agenda bash here a little bit and put going through these working group last call items as first item for our next session. And that'll give people a chance to go review the mailing list, make some slides, figure out what's open, and we can resolve them.
Yeah, that's fine. I will try to type up my comments as soon as possible during the day so people can prepare.
Okay.
Okay, so we have consensus that not having seen Magnus's comments is not my fault. I didn't get them. Other people's comments are my fault. What I'll try to do is I'll go through the list and find. When is this? Is this Friday or Thursday?
The next session is tomorrow.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I'm not. I may have a conflict. I do like something really important, right? Okay. I'll see if I can turn these at least into issues. Okay.
And now, JSAP. Back to the... Now. Don't knock it till you've tried it.
It's also not a pink box. It's like a gray box. Or beige. Exactly. So we really are going to like Merv Griffin this. Okay, so the changes since the last draft. Yeah, so we're going to do our sort of typical thing where we're going to go through like the effectively non-controversial stuff that's just like, list of bucket of stuff that like hopefully nobody disagrees with. Then I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on the things that like we changed that we think like actually like people might care about. And then we have some open issues that we'd like to discuss. Now, of course, if the previous discussion, which I thought was going to be fast as any guide, like the hinges themselves will all be controversial. So, as I say, I'll go through these quickly. Per working group consensus, we changed it so there's no special behavior after the close in terms of local description or remote description. Namely, you just return where the last crap that happened to be there is. I still think this is stupid, but it's a consensus. As we discussed, it was very confusing to people to have all these RTP profile names that are new profile names that say TCP/TLS, even though there's always UDP over DTLS. Unfortunately, we can't fix that with the old stuff. We can fix it with like SCTP. So now we have inconsistency, but at least lack of confusion. We had a long discussion about separating out bundle-only policy versus RTP MUX policy. I have a slide on that separately. We added, so this is mostly editorial, we added this references the effect mechanism so people can understand what we're talking about. We added this can trickle thing, which we discussed. I don't have a slide on that, but I think it was all pretty straightforward. If you don't like it, yell. And then we added like two big sections, really Justin added two big sections on how to handle subsequent answers and answer options and set local and remote description. So these need review, by the way, because there are like a lot of them, right? Next slide. And in fact, I recall sending a mail to the list saying, why don't people read these in advance of the meeting? So maybe you saw that mail, in which case maybe you did it. Okay, Hange's detail. Seriously, can we like just, like ridiculous. Okay, fine. So we agreed in Honolulu to have like separate policy. So initially we used to have like, bundle only, bundle max and RTCP mux, and like bundle without. And orthogonality seemed good and combinatorial explosion seemed bad. So now we have two policies, one for bundle and one for RTCP muxing. We danced around on the names for a little while, and for a while we had like max mux and non-mux. We finally came to the conclusion that some good names would be require, which means you only do RTCP mux, and negotiate, which means you'll do either. And for the offerer, what this means for the offerer is pretty straightforward. The offerer in require will only gather one set of candidates for the mux for the RTP, and negotiate he will gather both. He'll gather both mux and non-mux. And so obviously this is a big benefit for the offerer because it doesn't have to do as much work. It doesn't do as much ice gathering. Now, this raises the question of how the answerer ought to behave. There basically are two postures. One is the answer should be permissive, and that is to say that if the answer, so the question is, what happens if you're your WebRTC endpoint and you set require and then you get an offer from somebody who is like some old thing which is never heard of RTCP mux. And so he doesn't give you the A equals RTCP mux, and he gives you two candidates, right? So one attitude, the naive attitude you would think would be that you should just say, great, I'll negotiate and I'll do no mux. We came to the conclusion that's not a good idea, and here's the reason. If you were in that situation and you agree to that, and you're talking to somebody who's old and therefore has never heard of mux, if you try to add a track later, and then now you're the offerer and you're in require mode, you will not be giving him two candidates, and then it will fail, and so it will fail mid-call in some creepy way. And so rather it fail earlier, and so the design here is basically is to take people with actually incompatible policies and make them fail right away consistently, rather than in some sort of Heisenberg state. So our argument is here: you should reject the track in this case. It took a while to convince ourselves of this, so this would now be the time to say that you don't think this is the right resolution.
So as clarification question, so if the offerer says require and answer does not want to do mux, so
sorry?
If the offerer says do RTCP mux, but the answerer does not want to mux, so how is it?
If the offerer says require,
yep,
and the answer has never heard, the answer has only two choices: do mux or fail the connection, or fail the track. And
then do reoffer again, so that.
I mean that's a bigger JSON question, right? I mean, okay. What does he do if what happens if I want to do video but I only offer H267 and you only do VP20? Sorry? Suhas. Thatcher.
So if somebody specifies max bundle and then the remote side can't, Peter Thatcher. Group. So if the JavaScript specifies max bundle and then the remote side can't do bundle, remind me again what we do?
Right.
But
So we decided
but
we decided that was not as bad a situation because something will still work. Because you still get some tracks.
okay, so
we decided that
there's a justification for failing less hard.
Yeah, we considered making it be hard and decided that wasn't worth doing. But certainly, if you wanted to argue for that, like my head would not explode.
But if we reject the track, wouldn't we end up basically rejecting all the tracks?
That's the most likely outcome, yes.
Which is not
Basically
a whole lot different.
Basically a hard failure, right?
Okay.
But it might be the case that for some crazy endpoint, like offered, RT mux or one and not the other. I mean, that's not, no one's gonna do that.
So there might be a softer fail, but
yeah, most likely
it
not.
might be a hard fail anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, so Martin Thompson, I'm just going to make an observation. It's an API thing, probably not the right venue. You fail the track. I suspect that implementations of JSEP that currently exist, if they fail piecewise on every single track in the session, will quite happily report that they've just moved into the stable state.
Well, those are silly implementations. I'm sure ours is such an implementation, but that makes us very silly.
I don't know if this is entirely true. I remember reviewing the code, but I can't remember the details of it. That's an interesting corner that you might want to call out.
But that is true regardless of this, right?
That is true.
And that'd be true if all I offered was 266 and like Vopis and.
There's a bunch of reasons where you can end up in a state where you have a bunch of M lines, all of them with 0 port numbers on them.
Yes, quite so. Okay, great. This is already in the draft, so if nobody disagrees, we'll keep going. Next slide. Okay, so we're trying to strike a compromise in JSEP between having a document which is nothing but pointers to like a pile of RFCs, and restating every single SDP RFC that's ever existed. And so the what we've been doing is I think what Justin was calling SDP the good parts, and which may be a little too mean, but accurate but mean. That's why this is such a short document. So I mean to be clear, the intent here is not to subset SDP. The intent here is to produce a document which, when read on its own, makes enough sense that you have like a fighting chance of implementing things without reading every SDP RC in the universe and give you a guide to what's relevant and what's not. That gives us a philosophy, the following philosophy. So we normally depend on SDP and we reference the SDP specifications and offer answer. So that's the baseline. Nearly any valid interaction with a valid SDP endpoint should be handled according to the existing specifications by a JSON implementation. So if you get like an offer from like a SEP endpoint, even if it's like really prehistoric, it should basically work. However, because SDP is like so big, we're trying to provide this map to make this all work, so that again you can sort of read this and have some sense of what to do without having to sort of read everything and then go back and reverse engineer what's important and what's not. So that's the intent of the sections we have here. I'm going to go in detail what that implies in a minute, but I wanted to give a background for what we're trying to do, so nobody thinks that we're trying to provide an exhaustive description, or alternately we're trying to say that the things that we don't refer to aren't important. Neither of those things is true.
Krister, yes, but regarding the first bullet, when we depend on offer answer, we're actually not subsetting, we're actually supersetting offer answer. So I think, because for example, this whatever it's called, this provisional answer, that's one thing we allow. So I think it's good to those part we should explicitly describe how those differ from 3264.
And we try to do that. I'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, okay.
So next slide, please. So we start from the principle that so we do basically 4 things basically to accomplish this goal. First of all, we try to reference all the relevant specifications as appropriate. And so here's an example of this where all we have is like, this is the section of the document that you need to read, especially to process this, but it's simply a pointer. And so you can't process it independently, but at least now you know where to look when you're doing this section of your code. Next slide. Second category is things that are especially important and especially non-obvious from when you might have missed in SDP. We're actually calling out explicitly. So here's an example of the M lines and the C lines, which are especially important to get right, and so we're calling them out specifically. But as you can see, we're providing a reference back to the document, so you can go see for yourself what exactly the specification says. Next slide. So in some cases, as Christopher just suggested, or in other cases, SDP may not be as complete as one would like.
Sorry, could you go back to the previous one, please?
Yes.
I guess I didn't check spec, but obviously when you are, is this only the initial offer, or because when you're removing something, then you're going to have port 0, for example, in them lines. So then it's not going to be.
So let me cut this discussion off and stipulate this particular text might in fact be wrong. Or I don't think it is, but you can send us a separate message about that. The intent. Yeah. Anyway, this is an example. I'm just trying to give you a sense of how to think about how we're trying to write this text, because what I'm trying to avoid is a situation where we get hundreds of emails saying that here are all the things this doesn't cover that you didn't understand, so you understand what we're trying to accomplish. Next slide. Yes, the email will be fine too. I can talk to that. So in many cases, SDP either isn't completely clear or isn't a complete solution for some reason. In the case Christopher just answered, suggested a PR answer or extending it, or in the case of how to handle the stuff in Unified Plan, where frankly it just wasn't really complete and adequate, and it was perhaps more suggestive than dispositive. So when necessary, we're filling the gaps. We try to call those points out when we're doing so. Finally? Yes. So in a few cases, we're actually contradicting the RFCs in places where we just think they're too messy to deal with. And those are cases when we will call them out to you, and we'll have working consensus on doing those things. So here are two examples where basically, K-lines, who knows what K-lines were for, but they're not for anything now. And this stuff about accepting these profiles, which basically are actually illegal profiles in RTP profiles in some cases, but that we agreed with strong consensus at the last meeting that nevertheless you should accept them anyway. So here's an example where we're actually basically contradicting the RFCs, I would argue, but as I say, we ask for consensus when we do those things. So if you think we contradicted something in the RFCs that we didn't try to get consensus on, then they call us out on it, so it was a mistake of some kind.
Hi, Colin Perkins. That K equals change should be made to 4566 bis if it hasn't been already.
Who is editing that?
Ali.
We could pass it on to him. That would be so. Obviously, anything which we can do to take these requirements, these changes, and push them back into the main documents, even better. So again, that's the map of the kind of things we're trying to do. Mr. Roach. Okay, sir.
So when I read Keith Craig, when I read this first, I thought this is all going to be informative, but I'm not convinced anymore. Can you sort of clarify what is normative and what's informative about what you're about to write here?
Sure.
And in particular, what happens to something that isn't listed?
Right. So let me maybe get to that in a second, because we actually have a discussion about the specific strategy. I think do we have a slide here on how each of the M lines is handled, right? We have a slide. Yeah, we have a slide here about how to handle every single M line. Every single SDP line. So let me get to that in a minute. We're trying to be clear. Next slide. Right here. Good. So this is basically the sketchy version of the M line, the SDP line processing algorithm that we provide, which again is intended to follow the principles I just told you about. First you go through the SDP, and so every single line in the SDP has to conform to the ABNF, even for things which you have no use for. So you have no use for, to give you an example, we have no use really for I, right? But it better match the ABNF anyway. Then the lines that we actually have some actual use for, we try to tell you what to do with them and point to the RFC that tell you. So the V line, for instance, it better have version 0. Then we have a set of lines which basically we don't think do anything meaningful and are not in this context. And we say go out and check them for syntax, but don't do anything else. Syntax and semantics, but don't do anything else. And this list may not be correct, but we'll move things out as asked.
Okay, Jonathan, I mean the one question I'd ask is the C line. You probably should detect ICE mismatch and fail if the C line plus the M line don't actually match one of the base candidates.
I could live with that.
So this is one of the things where sort of comes under like what kind of semantic processing should happen. Like, if the e-line specifies an email address that's
Oh,
not
yeah,
exact.
E-line, ignore, absolutely, yeah. I mean, the only one I'm querying here is C, and I don't remember what Z is.
But since we don't actually do anything with the C-line, we're just sort of processing it for like nannyistic sake,
Yeah, well, no, you're processing it to make sure that there wasn't some middle box that didn't understand ICE that mucked with your SDP. And if that happened, you're sad and you should fail. That is the point of the ICE mismatch processing.
Okay. I mean, we have to.
Colin Jennings, I actually find it really one of the great things about ICE is that when a NAT ALG that doesn't understand SIP messes with your C line and messes it up, your call still works because you ignored the C line and didn't get an error even though it didn't match things. So I'm not exactly sure which way I'd go on this one. I feel like we're not going to use it, so why check it?
That's generally my feeling. Like, other than syntactical checks, like stuff that we're not going to use, we probably shouldn't try to be too smart about. Like Jonathan did raise a point of like there's something we actually could do with it. Although you made a counterpoint that like in those cases we might actually work properly if we didn't actually check it. I don't know enough about the sort of deployment space to really know which of those is like a better idea. But I think our default policy would be if we're not going to actually do something with it, we would just syntactically check it and it was fine, just like, bit bucket it.
So, Jonathan, do you want us to discuss? Do you want to push on this more? Do you want us to take an issue for this? How do you want to process this suggestion?
Okay, Paul Kisiot. Syntax of attributes presents issues. The ABNF of 4566 doesn't specify syntax of particular attributes. 4566 bis does.
By attributes you mean A lines, right?
Yes, I would assume so.
Yes, I think we did intend you would check A-line attributes for the A-lines you'd heard of and not for the A-lines you'd not heard of. Though, as a practical matter, it's hard to imagine there's any A-line that I've heard of that I care about enough to process the syntax for that I'm not going to do something with. So it's basically the same thing.
Paul follows up. I think must enumerate a set of attributes for which syntax must be checked.
That would be fine. We have a list of attributes you have to do something with. If there are attributes that you think we should check the syntax for and not do anything with, please tell us about them.
Right. So just like this is an overview of like we're putting these things into these different buckets. You must do these things with certain lines. Other ones you just make sure are syntactically correct and set aside. We will have the same sort of enumeration of all the A equals values as well in the actual document. And
Jonathan, I guess I just want to say, if you are choosing to not do ICE mismatch processing, you should specifically call out this is a change from 5245. You're changing the rules from what 5245 says to not do ICE mismatch processing.
I would propose we do that, unless someone disagrees.
The other thing somebody pointed out on Jabber is that this also has, one advantage of this is that it's, if you're doing trickle, you might not have a default candidate at all, so you might need to ignore the C line.
So I suggest we do ignore it. We'll call it out. Could someone make a GitHub issue for that, please? Do we have someone doing GitHub? Martin will do it. Thank you. Adam, did you have an opinion here? We haven't even got to the B line, which is the fun one, but keep going.
Yeah, no, this is Adam Roach. I'm a little concerned about ignoring the sesh version part of the O line.
Sorry, which word?
Sesh version. So O has a bunch of fields, and one of them is.
It's processed out. It says right here.
Oh, sorry. I said, okay, I was reading the does not do anything with the following type of lines. I misread the E as an O from back there. I'm sorry.
Man, your vision isn't very good anymore. Yeah.
You work for a company with a better vision.
Exactly, yeah. We actually make you, it makes you stronger. He has to wear like little Harrison Bergeron glasses, right? K-lines we think are, as I said, bad, so they must not be there and you should generate an error. This is the one we're actually calling explicitly. We talked to Jonathan and he cleared it with it. We agreed with him. That no sane person would have one of those, we concluded. The O and M lines you actually have to use, do something with. And O, yes, we agree O is important because the version increment for SDP updates. So that leaves us at B. And as you can see here, we have like issue number 27, which as you assigned to you, Adam, for going through and auditing the lines we generate for matching up with this kind of stuff. I'll follow up with you later. This leaves B. B is fun. Only Magnus understands B. So I'm going to let Justin take it.
Yeah, so the question is like, what should happen if we get a B equals line at the session level? And typically the way we think about, at least I've been thinking about B equals, is the B equals AS. We're basically saying, you know, for a given track, you should not encode it at any more bandwidth than this expressed value. And so what would a B equals AS at session level mean? And Colin mentioned that, well, a B equals CT at session level actually is sort of makes funny sense because it's like, well, here's the total bandwidth for the conference. And so I was like, well, what would happen, you know, if you specify this, like what's the browser going to do? Because the browser has really no clear indication about, well, if there's two video streams, how much should it give to each? Or a video and audio stream, what should it give to each? And I think if you want that, then the path is clear. Just use B equals AS. So really what we're recommending is the control of bandwidth should be done using B equals AS or potentially B equals TIAS for the individual n-line level, individual medium level, B equals AS values. However, if we got a B equals CT at session level, the browser could try to make its best guess of what to do. You know, it could say, well, the audio is at this fixed rate, and everything like the CT value minus that fixed rate can be set aside for video. Anything else is an error and you know, must be reported as such. And so like AS at session level or CT at medium level would each cause an error in you know, set remote description. Yeah, I was going to refer to that. That if Magnus is okay with this, I guess we're okay with this as well.
Dr. Westerlund to the mic, please.
Per Adam's comment
Dr.
before.
Westerlund to the mic, please.
You can just say yes or no. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, if you remember last time, we all kind of we threw our hands up in the air and said Magnus has had to do this. You know, he's on leave.
So this is the
now.
FTP, the good parts of trying to codify what the stuff actually does in something that's not Magnus's head.
So Magnus Westerlund. First, one comment about you said TIS. I just need to remark that TIS has no defined offer-answer semantics.
So here's where we can fill in a gap if necessary.
TIS, the SDP bandwidth modified TIS. It only has declarative meaning. It doesn't stop it to be used in offer-answer, but it's not defined what it means. Yeah, I think I agree with CT being treated as an error on media level. I think it only makes sense at the session level, that I can state. I think the complication potentially with CT is it does really not make a distinction. I was saying it's the total bandwidth includes both incoming and outgoing, which makes it a little bit less useful, I think. I was going to check that when you called me up here, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, probably would be a good thing would be if we can sort of take an action for you to follow up on that. The other thing we probably would need to talk about, and I didn't really remember to mention here, is like what would happen if you get both CT and AS? And like a CT at session level and then AS at, you know, medium level. And my sort of feeling would be like you just ignore the CT and just, you know.
No, it's not that simple. CT would be the total. That's the total of everything limit. AS is a limit on one specific, it is application specific maximum.
Sure, okay.
So it tells you this stream you can't go above AS value, basically.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So basically, you know, if there's any streams that don't have a B specified, then like they use whatever's left over of the CT minus the other expressed AS.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Ronnie, it's more like when you have on the media level, then each line of the media level can have, when you sum it up, it can be more than the CT, but it is limited by the CT. So that enables you to say that if one of the stream is not happening, then you still can go up on the other ones. That's how it works today.
What if they're all filled in? Like where? Like
so that's left up to the implementation how to divide it. But that's what they do. They allow you to allow more than that. It's the rule says that you should not that the media level, the total of the media level can be more than the session level, when you sum it, but you are limited by the session level. And the other comment I have about TAIS is that Magnus is right about the document, but practically it's being used by video conferencing systems today to signal pure video only usage without any overhead. Like
Right, and that was how I would expect we would use TIAS. It's just like AS, except removing the bandwidth cost of headers.
Except that Magnus is right because the document doesn't say that it's for offer answer, but it's being used. Okay.
Right, but we have a chance to fix that. I mean, like we are being, to an earlier point, like we are being normative about these gaps that we're trying to fill in, so that we can have like implementations that have deterministic behavior.
Yeah, Don, like just to amplify a little bit further on the CT versus AS. I mean, I think it's perfectly reasonable for somebody to say, video 1 should not go above 1 megabit, video 2 should not go above 1 megabit. My total budget is 1.5 megabits, so use your judgment as to which one wants to, should get more bandwidth at any given time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously harder for implementers, but
But as an API is also like terrible, right? I mean.
No, I mean why? I mean if you want, yeah. I mean if you want something to not give freedom to the browser, then make the numbers add up. If you do want to give freedom to the browser, then don't make the numbers add up and let the browser decide what's the sensible thing to do.
Well, the point is right. How much should we just say do that? Just send B equals AS values that say, why don't you just tell me the name of the movie you want to see? And as opposed to like this implementation specific thing where you might get one value in one browser and one value in a different browser.
I think that Martin Thompson, this actually may be a point of distinction between the browsers and one place where we actually allow that to happen. The reason that I don't think we want to have all of the AS add up precisely to the CT is that then caps, that makes the CT effectively useless in the sense that if you've got 4 5 megabit streams, they're not always using 5 megabits. That's just the absolute limit on the quality of each one of those individual streams that you're willing to tolerate, essentially. But if you set the CT at 4 times 5 is 20, most of the time you're actually going to be wasting all of that bandwidth because you can't actually use any of that 20 megabits. But if you say 4 times 5 and I've got a total of 10, which is actually reflective of the amount of pipe space on your uplink or downlink that you're willing to dedicate to this, then how the browser allocates that is up to it. But I presume in that case it would just divvy it up as it sees fit. Some streams get more bits sometimes, and other streams get other bits other times. Just like we don't mandate a particular way of measuring AS, and we leave that somewhat unspecified. I think this is fine.
Sorry, say that last sentence again.
We don't actually specify how AS is measured precisely. I don't think here's the envelope that you're working in, but over what period do you calculate how many bits you've transmitted, all those sorts of other things. So there's a bit of wiggle room in there anyway, and most of the time people are going to be well below the AS limits that are set. Otherwise, it doesn't actually work very well.
Okay, I mean
this is not fixed bit rate.
Sure, I mean that makes sense. We were going to honor CT anyway. I think that if you really want something to be specific, then use AS, and that's the guidance that we're suggesting here. But yeah, we can make sure that we work both when we get CT by itself or CT in the presence of AS.
Okay. Let's see. I will start with it myself first. I thought about the CT direction problem. It's standard offer answer basically being the received direction would be applying, unless you have send receive streams.
It's only the send bandwidth, not the total.
No, it will be the received bandwidth for the declaring agent according to standard offer answer.
Yeah. Huh?
But yes. Then I will channel Randall Jeffsup. AS is the maximum, not the amount used at any point. CT is the limit for all at any given point. I agree with the Lennox MT Roney. And further he comments also that some streams are very bursty, screen share data channels.
Sure. I mean, discretion must be applied over what window this is used. Okay, so I think we have a pretty good sense of this is pretty much right. Need to talk specifically about the case where there's CT and AS. And on the TIAS, while the document that defining TIS does not specifically say its usage and offer answer, is this something that we should define here in this document, or should we just leave it as AS and say that's close enough? Does anyone have an opinion on that?
I think this, Keith Drage, I think there's some general issues you need to actually work out what you're trying to do here. Do you have a WebRTC or Rtcweb specific reason for saying this, or is this a general consideration where you think the original specification was written somewhat shoddily in the first place? Because if it's the latter, I think you need to go back to MMusic and fix it, not try and fix it in Rtcweb.
Ronnie, the question will be how important you want to be with the precision of the bandwidths, because it depends how you count the bandwidths used based on, is it just the payload, the RTP, the overhead, whatever. Okay, so if you don't care so much for the precision, it doesn't matter much, okay? If it's AS or TIS. Otherwise, you'll need to decide, you'll need to do that. And mostly it's important if you go to narrow, to go to bands, to places where you have limited the bandwidth and you need to be precise on that.
Yeah, well, I think that's my explicit concern of why we're even talking about this is like for specifying audio bandwidth. There's various ways you could do this, but if you use B equals AS, like the value you might express there could be substantially higher than if you're doing a TIAS, just because of like the overhead in audio cases of like the IP UDP headers is quite significant.
So, Colin James, just to answer Keith's question, I don't think that we're changing any of the things the underlying specs say here. I think that a lot of this stuff was somewhat discretionary, and we're just trying to inform what a browser implementation, which parts of SDP it's required to implement and which parts it's not required, or which parts to implement. So I don't think on these ones, I don't think we're talking about changes to the underlying specs. Clearly, with some of the things earlier, sure, we'll fix it up in the biz draft, but I don't see these as that type of thing. No, I don't think the underlying specs say cover this type of information. I think they reflect this type of thing. And whether a given endpoint decides to implement, there's no requirement in SDP that says you must implement CT, right? What it says is, all we're talking about here is we're trying to decide whether we're going to make CT an MTI, mandatory to implement feature or not for browsers. And we're saying, yeah, we are. I don't think we're changing underlying stuff. We're just saying what you have to implement.
Jonathan Lennox. That said, I think things like, AS doesn't make sense at session level, CT doesn't make sense at media level. If those really are bugs in SDP, they should be fed back to SDP BIS. I don't think that JSIP wants to be blocked in SDP BIS, but I think those are things that should get, and also like things like defining TIAS and offer answer, things like that, should get passed back to MMusic for things that MMusic to work on, and hopefully they'll come to the same decisions as JSIP came to. If not, those drafts might need to be updating JSIP, which would be unfortunate. But
okay, so that makes sense. I think we should still proceed with the work here and say, here's how we think it should work, and then independently, so we're not blocking the other stuff, take as errata for those other documents.
Mosinati, quickly on that point, I don't think there's any errata. I think everything is specified fine. CT is valid at a media level. CT means all of the, traditionally without bundle, the media level is a separate session, right? So it's not where, CT is not about SDP sessions, it's about media RTP sessions. So for CT at a media line, the RTP session for that media line, it's all of those people's audio bandwidths. If you have a video line, it's all of those video people's bandwidths. So those are two separate things. It's totally fine on the media level. So I don't think you have to worry about SDP getting fixed. But what I think we should focus on is this is Rtcweb, not MMusic. I'm less concerned about, what's the proper SDP semantic, is what's useful for Rtcweb. From what I hear, this is being used to control send bandwidth of the browser, right? We want to use this as an API. So I think it's worded properly here that you're interpreting this as what the other side wants to receive. So you specify this in remote description. You poke this into remote description, and you get that send bandwidth out of the browser. And so that means it's not really relevant for getting your local descriptions?
I mean, to be specific, this is what somebody who only wanted to receive a certain amount, and if they sent this, then that would be received as a remote description, pushed in, and that would then control the outbound bandwidth of that sender. You could, of course, fob it yourself and specify this by updating the remote description. But yes, this would be on the remote description.
Okay.
So the point you mentioned about CT, the CT on a medium level is supposed to include all the RTP senders in the session. Does that include like both the local side and the remote side? Or
Yes. So bundle is what's breaking CT, not anything in STP itself. Bundle is what confuses CT, because CT is supposed to mean for the RTP session all of the bandwidth of this RTP session. So usually in a media line, those media lines are all independent RTP sessions. So as originally defined, it meant everybody for that media line's bandwidth, all the remote and local guys, every RTP sender.
Doesn't that also have an implication that even session level CT is counting send and receive bandwidth?
Yes. So bundle or MUX attributes should actually make it clear that CT, when you're bundling, is really the session level and the media level have to all be the same, because that's really a bundle or MUX attribute level problem.
Jonathan, I mean, this is really getting into one of the places I think where offer answer broke the original semantics of SDP. So we really need to look at not what the original SDP says about CT, but what, if anything, offer answer says about CT. Because SDP was originally written for talking about multicast groups where everybody is sharing the bandwidth of the multicast group, and offer answer is what changed that. So I don't remember what, if anything, offer answer says about CT. If it doesn't, maybe it needs to. And I think that the semantic of, in an offer answer scenario, of CT means all the things, whichever direction it is, but just CT being unidirectional offer answer makes a lot more sense, but I don't know if it's specified anywhere or not.
Yeah, Magnus Westlund. I mean, I can agree more from a declarative SDP point of view, but I think, as Jonathan says, it's the offer answer interpretation of CT that would apply in this case, and I think that would give it directionality.
So look, I think we actually got this right in the MUX draft. We actually got it right in offer answer. I mean, it says in offer answer, says the bandwidth attribute of present for stream, blah, 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 indicates the bandwidth the offerer would like to receive. And in the MUX draft, we deal with the issue that CT bundle breaks CT, so you can't bundle if you have CT at the media level. That's already in the MUX draft. I think we're all coming around to the same answers, and the other documents and other working groups that people are talking about need to also be right. Most probably already are right.
So, Dr. Jennings, would you stay at the mic, please, in your role as chair? We have 50 minutes left with a number of other issues. Is there a resolution past that we want to try and get to today, or should we move on to the next topic?
I would leave that to the presenter, but I imagine we want to move on would be my guess. I mean, I think we can propose text based on, we can propose text to the list along these lines and see if anyone can bring up specifics where it's wrong or we need to go do something. Is there anything?
Nope,
That's my individual contributor hat on here, right?
Yeah, I feel like I have enough context to basically take this, turn to text, refine it a little bit with some of the feedback, and see if people salute.
Okay, let's move on to the next topic.
And I've already opened issues for all of those things you need to do.
My AA. All right. So this is a long-standing question. How do you basically express what's the maximum resolution that you can receive, or frame rate, or just overall pixel rate? Image adder was defined to sort of do this in a codec agnostic way, and it turns out there may be multiple sort of limits that need to be basically you have to be aware of here. If you have a hardware decoder, you have to be aware of the maximum resolution your decoder is limited to. The application may also say, hey, I don't want to get any more than X because perhaps it knows that it's on a weak CPU, or perhaps it knows something about its own environment, like the screen only has so much resolution. And then there's the actual surface the video is being displayed on that the browser knows about, and could actually use that as a hint to what it wants to receive. Now the difference is that the explicitly set limits by the app or the video tag could be soft limits, that they don't say don't send me more than X. They might just be advisory, because if you have to decide in a simulcast case between getting 360p or 720p and you're at 719p, well, you probably want 720 instead of 360. So that's not really like a hard limit per se. Image adder, the grammar has a bunch of different stuff in there, various Q values for supporting different types of different preferences. But there's not really a super great way to say, well, my hardware decoder can do 1080, and really as an app, I only want to get 720, but my video tag is 715. So this makes things a bit complicated. Next slide. So what I think we really want to do is just make sure that no receiver gets crushed by video they can't decode due to their decoder limits or anything that the application specifically knows that I can't decode. So they could express this via constraints on the received media stream track, and that would then be fed back to the other side as through this SDP negotiation. And so the browser should be able to query its runtime and know what is the actual decoder limit. Should be able to find out what any explicit things the app has set and turn that into a single image adder receive value, saying here's the maximum that I want to receive right now. I'm suggesting we ignore any of these soft limits, the video tag size. I don't think it adds that much value, and it makes things very complicated. Here's an example. Next slide. So here's example scenario. I think this is kind of a real-world scenario, and here's what would actually be expressed in the SDP for that particular M line to indicate this to the sender.
So Martin Thompson, this is a good set of principles, I think, but there's a couple of questions I guess I have. If you know your decoder limits are less than this for, say, H.264 or VP8 or one or the other, do you allow a payload type in places of that star? So you can say, well, I've got a hardware decoder for H.264, it can do this, but my CPU is pathetic, it can't really do VP8 in software.
Yeah, I think that would make sense.
Rate. So per codec would be okay.
Yeah, I mean, that scenario that you just explained is a very real-world scenario.
I think it happens all the time. That's why I got up. Yeah.
Magnus Westland. I do wonder a bit why you actually don't use the multiple sets to express NQ values to express I can do the highest resolution and I prefer to do something which is a resolution approximately close to the actual rendering tag.
Right. Well, so I'd like to get your thoughts on this. The reason was I looked at what the definition of the Q values is, and it's fairly vague in terms of exactly what's meant. And so you can imagine two different cases. One where like the soft limits have a higher Q value than the hard limits, and that might cause you to actually emit a stream that wasn't actually decodable. Or they could be lower than that of the hard limits, and then they might be ignored because the sender says, hey, I can satisfy the highest Q value. It's not clear that you should be looking at satisfying as many of the Q values as possible or satisfying the most, the highest value Q.
Okay, but I mean the point of image attributes to express a set of resolutions which are the ones that, hey, these resolutions work for me if you send them to me. That's the purpose of attribute. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So that's those are hard limits, right? The soft limits. I don't know how you express those in this mechanism. You can send them out of band. That's the other thing. It's like it's a browser. It can send this through whatever mechanism it wants to.
Yeah. I mean, to a certain degree, I mean the hard limit. There's other, at least for certain of the codecs, there's other ways of expressing the hard limit. I mean, there's a question of maximum macro rates, the profile levels, etc., and all these things to express that.
Yeah, that's all very codec specific, though, and like.
Yeah, but I mean, the point of saying is that if you express a certain number of sets, why aren't you getting anything of those that you've expressed? And if you express one high, I mean, if you like have a full HD and you have, I had this 640 with a higher, which is the soft, saying preferred, really preferred because it's closest to the actual rendering size. Why would the sender send something which was way outside of even the higher full HD one? That would crush you.
I didn't quite follow what you were saying there. Prefer to have a higher and lower queue.
So, Martin Thompson, I think I can explain this one. You have a range of things that you can do, but a narrower range of things that you might prefer. So that you might prefer the small one because that's just how many pixels you have to display at this point in time. I think this is potentially a lot of complexity, and I don't really like carrying around bags full of knives like this. So I would rather go with what Justin has suggested, maybe with the tweak that I relating to the payload types, and leave it at that. Even though these things might be attractive and you might be able to invent some use cases and all those sorts of other wonderful things, starting with this means that we actually have a good chance of it working. And I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence of things like this working yet. So once we get to the point where everyone's happy that this works, then we can sort of layer on the extra preferences stuff.
Parallel this, John. If you look into the JSEP repository, there's a pull request with my name on it, which tries to do exactly what Magnus suggested. It made my head hurt when I wrote it. In fact, and when Justin started asking, and how does this work exactly? My head hurt some more, so I stopped. I think that this proposal has two nice properties. It's clear what it does, and it doesn't block us from from adding more knives to our juggling in the future. But I don't want to I don't want to finish the pull request I started.
So just to continue bashing Harold's pull request, when we investigated it deeply too, it had modes where the video tag size caused it to end up sending more video than the hard limits of the hardware decoder could support or something. Like there was lots of corner cases where it didn't work that we didn't know how to fix. So I think it was hard to do that. I just wanted to flag on the other thing of the other approaches to doing this based on maximum number macro blocks and things like that. I don't think they work for the transcoder cases, so I think we do need something like this that does the hard limits, and this would meet the needs. So, this is the simplest thing I've seen that seems so far to meet every need we've had. I like it.
Mozanetti, again, I want to make sure I understand how to do this in Rtcweb context, using it as an API. So I think the most valuable thing is how do I control what the browser can send, and I would be using this to pass in from my remote description. I'm saying this is what the remote side is asking for in its receive image attribute, and that's going to force the browser to send that.
Right. So
that
the
resolution.
browser and create offer will automatically jam in the hard limits of any decoders, and probably any constraints that are applied in the remote media stream track will also be slammed in there. So there won't be any frothing necessary. But yes, it's whatever's in the receive remote description marked as image header receive will control what the receiving browser sends.
Right. Okay. And I'm thinking more from an application point of view. If they know that they want to affect what the browser can send, regardless of what the peer actually said, but I can force the remote description to be this in order to force the browser to send a particular resolution. That's the API semantic that we're going for here.
That will work.
So, yes, sorry, Eric Squirrel. So just from my understanding, if this is going to work properly with video tag, then I have to slam it into a video tag. When the track comes in, this only works for the answerer basically, and when the track comes in, I have to slam it into the video tag in like the. So how do we get this app wants XY? Maybe I didn't understand that.
Oh, yeah, so that would have to be, either a thing on the receive, like on the offer side, it's a good question. I don't think there's not an API service to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, like, if you had an RTP receiver, you could set it on there. If you had a media stream track, you could do it on there. I think that's a W3C issue. We can try to figure that out. But it'll fill in the decoder limits on the offer properly already.
For the hard limits.
Yes.
Right.
Well, they're all hard limits.
Right. For the limits that are built into the browser.
Hardware limits.
The limits built into the browser are the limits on the application. Okay. And so when you say intersect, what this actually means is take the maximum, the maximum min and the minimum max?
Yeah.
Okay, and the fact that actually might not represent any, the fact that depending on, if like, for some reason, this guy likes this way and this guy likes this way, like that may not represent any coherent section of space at all, like we're just live with that, right? Okay.
Magnus Westland. Okay, I can accept this. I have a question. Are I allowed to use the step value?
I mean, we can certainly process it and try to honor it. I don't see any issue in that. I don't, well, Martin's shaking his head, so like maybe. I mean, so the reason I'm thinking about that is that I can imagine there might be some encoders that can only produce like, or decoders only have step value, so.
So yeah, Martin Thompson, there are definitely encoders out there that only work in 8 or 16 or 32 or whatever it is.
You can always pad it out.
Increments.
So
you just, deal with that. And for the most part, people will understand where that's happening. I would rather not have anything more than what I see on the screen here. I was just concerned about the API aspects of this in the same way that Eka was. I think if you make this mandatory constraints on tracks that are emitted, then you have to do the whole intersection thing at the set of tracks that have been cloned off that, and then you have to file a negotiation needed if that happens at some time after the fact that the session has been established. There's a bunch of annoying properties around that I think we need to resolve in the W3C, but I think setting the baseline here, as you have done, gives us the necessary restrictions to go off and deal with those problems there. We may find that we actually have a really strong need for something, but we've gone around and around this particular merry-go-round so many times, and nothing has really gotten as good as this yet. So I think we want to set this down as basically done here, and then we can discuss the API implications separately, and maybe try to fit this particular box. And I think we can.
So, Magnus Westland again. I mean, maybe my only worry is that when you come to WebRTC compatible endpoints, it might actually give you something which contains a bit more information than this, a couple of sets, where they actually preferably would be that that you honor them, sending video. So I just wanted to look at the text later on when you actually written it. So
there's a comment in the Jabber from Randall. I support this with Martin's comment about payload/codec specifiers. This will work, and many other bits can be handled by applications, and maybe use of RTP senders / etc.
Yeah, great. I think one of the salient pieces here is the browser can fill in the decoder hard limits, and that's the thing one thing the application cannot do.
Yeah, I think the other point here, with respect to Magnus's point about you don't know that the other side's a browser, and they might send you an image attribute that's hugely expressive with 500 different things with Q values and steps and all sorts of other things, and you have to either wade through that soup, ignore it, or reject the SDP. Which one of those three options do we want to take here?
So I'm going to sort of say that we'll be normative about what JSET will do, is that it'll take the first, the Q value with the highest, receive with the highest Q value, and try to apply that.
That sounds reasonable to me. Is that's interoperable, so that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like the resolution here is that you'll write some text that reflects the agreement to go forward with this, and if we decide to add other knives to our juggling later, we will do so.
But this will resolve the current open issue in the text.
Yep. He will resolve the current open issue as proposed on the slide, with the addition of Martin Thompson's of his answer to Martin Thompson's question about what you do if you get the highly decorated one from the other side, which is highest Q value present, and that will go into the document as a resolution. That doesn't close off us eventually considering emitting more complex things in the future, but this is the resolution for the document.
Yes, first.
Yeah, so if there are two Q values which are equivalent, then the first of that.
Right.
Otherwise, it's the highest if they're ordinal.
Modulo, looking for one with a specific payload type as well. Much smaller. Move forward. Eric, you want to cover this one?
So I think everybody sort of agreed that it was kind of sucky if when you did a reoffer or re-answer, somehow the DTLS rules switched. That wasn't going to really work out for you very well. Generally we think that you should be forbidden from doing this. And then the question is, who is forbidden from doing it? And we think that the easiest thing to do is that the offerer should be forbidden from trying to change it. That is, the offerer should send ACT-pass initially and then send whatever was agreed to before, i.e. the opposite of whatever the answerer sent. And in the future, the answerer, at some point in the not too distant future, the answerer must check for this. But because probably Chrome and Firefox actually both choke if you try to send the new value, that will have to wait for like maybe 6 months or so to make that change. This seems like the highest probability of people getting it right and it staying right. That is, if we don't, the point is that now both sides have to behave correctly, and the answer will check the offerer's not doing it correctly. So the offer screws up, we'll catch it.
Ted Hardy is an individual. This seems like the only logical way to do it. So I think we should just accept that the offerer must do negotiated is the state for now.
Okay. Krister.
Yeah, Krister, we need to make sure this is aligned because we had the discussion also, for example, for the STP, STP draft. So obviously those need to be aligned. They seem to be. What I wonder here is, I think that's maybe what you mentioned earlier. You said that the answer must do the same as before, and of course, if it can. But if it receives an answer which basically prevents it to do as it did before, then I think you need to say either it rejects it or yeah.
Yes, I'm saying that if the offerer doesn't do what, so the offerer is supposed to do ACT-pass initially. The answerer is supposed to do either active or passive. It's recommended to do passive. If the answerer does active, then the next reoffer from the offerer must be passive. And if the answerer now does a reoffer, he must do active. And the other side must check that. And if you don't do what you agreed before, then it's a failure. And it's like a hard failure of like some sort of JSEP, blow up the world, not like reject the track.
Well, it's not a failure the other endpoint may not be a browser or following JSEP, so he can do whatever, offer answer allows him to do. But for example, what we did write in the STP...
Does anybody ever switch roles? Because if not, I think we should just prohibit this in STP drafts.
No. We did add to the STP draft, we actually wrote that once you have negotiated the roles,
right,
you don't change those during the session. So I think that's aligned with this. But what I'm saying is we need to make sure that it's aligned.
Right. I guess. I'm just trying to figure out: is there any actual practical problem with this proposal, or is this doc alignment?
This is fine. You do anything other than this is going to explode.
The only other thing to be sensible would be the answer doesn't have to check. That'd be the only other thing to be sensible, right?
Yeah, but then you're gonna have some weird behavior going on at that point.
I think that's generally true. Unless there is somebody who currently reoffers with ACT-pass who can't change their code and the sort of
we might delay the check for a little while until we can make sure that it's okay.
Right. Anyway, since our code is, I believe Chrome is wrong, and I think Firefox is wrong too. We're going to have to, accept both for 2 releases, and then switch, and then stop accepting, right? But we'll just do that.
I think it actually might be worse than that there might be things that blow up if they don't get ACT-pass on an offer. And so the transition time may be longer than 2 releases. It may actually be a year or something like that. But I do think that the second is better in terms of giving you less rope to hang yourself with.
So I think if we discover that there's actually people who choke on this and can't be changed, then we can revisit the decision. But I'd like to see some evidence of that before I get all bent out of shape about it.
John, maybe I'm just confused about what we're talking about here, but we said this morning that you're never allowed to re-handshake DTLS, so why would the roles change?
That's what we're saying, they can't change.
Oh, they can't change, so basically, what do you put in, we just asked what do you put in the attributes to explain they can't change?
Yes, exactly.
So, my inclination would be to say, my general inclination would be to say, describe what you wanted to do, and maybe have a note saying, there are bugs and, you might want to do something instead for a little while, or maybe just, so I mean, I think the spec should say what we want, unless, we have things that really, can't be changed for decades.
That's what I'm hoping.
So, by the way, the offer us to whatever is negotiated likely passive is not, likely passive is not true because this is not the same, necessarily the same offer
Yes,
as the
so.
original offer.
Quite so, yes.
Yes.
Yes, I was thinking the same offer, yes.
Just make sure if you, whatever reasons we're going to have for renegotiating a DTLS connection, whether it's, fingerprint or whatever, then I assume that these roles are going to be renegotiated, right? Then, because then you, or
Yes, I believe if you're tearing down the connection, starting a new one, you can do whatever you want.
yeah.
Okay, so we're beginning to run kind of tight on time, folks. So let's try and go through these as quickly as we can, so we can get at least some time with the FTC draft today.
Okay, so we talked about this in at least 2 previous ITFs, trying to sort of close this out here. And recall that the problem is, how do we have like a half-rejected track? This is the case where A is sending to B, has audio and video. B stops A's incoming video track, but B wants to continue to send video. This means that it can't do sort of port equals 0 to reject the track because it still needs to keep it open for its own video being sent. But it wants to have some way of informing A that, hey, I've stopped your video track. And we've got a bunch of things, the directional attributes in SDP, but they don't really say, hey, I've stopped your track. Now, on the sending side, you can say I stopped the track by removing the MSID attribute, but receive only, on the receive side, or sorry, send only on the receive side basically only says that I'm not receiving your track now, and doesn't necessarily mean I won't receive it in the future. So we said, well, the way we could do this would be adding some new bit of SDP. My example here, A equals receive only and never coming back. But it does appear this is a sort of ad hoc solution. So next slide. So we thought about it a bunch, and it's like, well, what if we just did nothing other than changing it to A equals send only? And I think that doesn't really cause any problem. Like A won't know to remove its track or anything like that, but as long as B consistently rejects any attempt by A to add that video again or change it back, this will work just fine. And these are browsers. If they really want to send some sort of stop message, there's multiple out-of-band ways that they can do this. So if we think that we need to deal with this in the future, if some use case comes up where this is really a problem, we can revisit it and add some additional piece of SDP that allows this to be expressed from B to A. But I think that right now we should just say, hey, it'll work fine. We can note the fact that B needs to continue to reject that track from A, and we should just move on. Kirby?
Yeah, Martin Thompson, just to be clear, I'm okay with this, but this means that there is no way to coerce the browser into a state where it will have a media section on hold in the inactive state. Is that right?
No, I don't think that's necessarily true. If B was not receiving but only sending, and then it for some reason put that on hold, then it could have an inactive M section.
Yeah, this is a feature that we don't currently have in the senders, but has been proposed.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, you could do it through SDP munging. But the salient point here is that this is there is proper control of are bits flowing over the wire or not. That stuff already exists. It's just a question of can A reclaim that space in its M section, and no, it can't. But it's not clear that it really needs to. This is a sort of a bit of an obscure use case, I think. So I think we just kind of do nothing on it rather than trying to solve a problem that maybe our energy is best spent elsewhere. Okay, hearing no dissent, move on. So this is initially has been discussed, I think, multiple times, but there's still been some confusion around it. And part of the confusion is our fault because we had some text that was itself confused within the actual document. Section 521 said that there's only ever one bundle group, and Section 411 says no, the data channels are in their own bundle group. The thinking has always been that there's only one bundle group. Bundle policy controls whether things are marked as bundle only, not the number of bundle groups. And so what we'll do is we'll fix 411, basically say, yes, there's only one bundle group.
Peter Thatcher. So this is just affecting create offer, right? If the application did SDP munging and pushed down SDP that has more than one bundle group, would it be respected?
Yeah, that's implementation dependent behavior, I would say.
So a browser could reject any SDP in set local or set remote that has more than one bundle group and
Yes.
still be compliant?
Sure.
Okay. That's good
Like,
news to me.
unless we would have to add new API if we're going to say we want multiple bundle groups. And I'm saying, we've in the past decided we're not going to do that. This is just bringing the text into alignment around this, and just sort of reiterating this thing of bundle policy controls the bundle only attribute. You can end up with things being unbundled, but if they're bundled, there's only going to be one bundle group.
Right, even if you're negotiating with a remote endpoint that sends you multiple bundle groups, you would reject it.
Well, no. If a remote endpoint sends you multiple bundle groups, then you'll have to honor that.
But I do have to honor that.
JSEP endpoints will only ever issue one bundle group.
So the set remote description can have multiple bundle groups, but the set local...
JSON endpoints will only ever generate offers that have, initial offers that have one bundle group.
Right, so what if the remote side replies with more than one bundle group?
What are you asking?
I'm asking whether when I implement this, I have to respect multiple bundle groups from the remote side or not.
I think that, since it's not prohibited by bundle, we do have to support. If the other side says you can have multiple bundle groups, we have to deal with that.
Well, right, but what is it that we did?
Well, I think that
maybe I can answer that, Chris. No matter how many bundle groups you're offered, you always have the option to reject the bundle group. You don't have to reject the SDP. You can simply reject the bundle group. That's so. I guess that's an implementation issue, as I think Justin mentioned earlier. Right.
So I guess my question is an implementation of a browser free to reject all but one bundle group and still be compliant? Because that would make the implementation a lot easier, but...
We should talk about that. I don't think I think that would be surprising to the person offering the bundle groups. Basically what we'd be saying is like JSEP is profiling bundle to say only a single bundle group can ever be used, which I don't think we're actually saying.
Okay.
Okay, we're running pretty tight on time, people here, so please.
How to Alvestrom. Note that this interferes with this particular section interferes with a part of the transport document, which we have on the agenda later. And this is about whether or not we can have a setup where we bundle all the video on one transport and all the audio on another transport. With this thing, we cannot generate such an offer. If we say that we have to accept more than one more bundle group, we can accept such an offer, so there's an upgrade path later if this functionality turns out to be needed. If we reject, if we say that must not accept more than one bundle group, we have locked ourselves in.
Yeah, I think that's the right. I agree with that.
Colin James, I was just going to raise the example quickly. You have two large videos that you're doing at high quality from a cost point of view, and you have a bunch of thumbnails that are being done at low quality from a cost point of view. Those two things couldn't be in the same bundle group, so you might want to have the 2 high-quality ones in one bundle group and the 20 thumbnails in another bundle group might be a case worth considering. I wouldn't want to rule. I wouldn't want to say. I'm not saying browsers should have to support that case, but I wouldn't want to rule out them being able to support that case.
Yeah, you're right. So I'm saying like the whole thing about what the API surface, how do you express all this sort of thing? I don't think we have anything like that. I think if someone somehow generates, in a incoming description, multiple bundles, we should deal with that. We should actually do it and not fail.
Yeah. So Martin Thompson, I can explain what Firefox does in this case, and we recently did this, so it's fresh in my mind. We support one bundle group only. We will act bundle stupid for all of the other bundle groups that are provided to us. We'll basically just take all of the media sections that are bundled in subsequent bundle groups and negotiate them one by one as possible. And if there's anything bundle only, and that we'll just negotiate them off. So that's what we currently do. We've gone back and forth about whether we want to actually support the negotiation of that stuff. I would support the middle path on this one, which is to say you must support one bundle group and you may support more of them, but if you do receive something that contains multiple bundle groups, you have to deal with it in a sensible fashion as described by the bundle draft.
Right.
As if you just simply don't support bundle for those groups. You just want to unbundle those groups effectively. And that's what we do, and I think that's perfectly fine. It's not going to support the sort of use cases that Colin described, but I think we will eventually support that sort of thing at some point in the future if it becomes important for us to do so. And I don't want to say must not support more than one, because I think that's just crazy.
So from the Jabber room, Paul Kizivat, if you end up with 2 bundle groups, then JSEP must decide which one to use for subsequently added tracks. As chair, I'm cutting the line after Jonathan Lennox.
Magnus Westlund, I think it's important that we can go to multiple bundle groups to support this. I mean, even just audio and video in different bundle groups. As soon as you start having multiple streams of either media types, you want to put them in different 5 tuples at the bottom. So.
Have we decided what happens if the JSEP modifies the bundle parameter or the RTCP mux parameters in between create offer and set local?
Setting all that aside, I would be fine saying that we don't do that.
Okay, I'm obviously fine with this text since I think I read it.
Jonathan, thanks. I mean, I guess this is probably the way to go. It makes me a little sad to say that there's certain behaviors that can only be achieved by, a remote offer and not by a local offer. Like the only way to get multiple bundle groups is to have the other side decide to do it, and there's no way to do it, from if I'm the guy sending the offer. I mean, maybe the way to do that would be to do something where you have to manually modify the SDP before set local, but.
Yeah, but I think that, someone just mentioned, like, what do you do when you add a new track when there's 2 bundle groups? Like, this stuff starts getting pretty thorny pretty quickly. I think that what we'd end up specifying here would be, like, just jam it in the first one, regardless.
Yeah, no, jam it in the first, create offer, jam it in the first one, and if the guy doesn't like that, he can edit it before set local.
So, I think today's discussion on this point has been good, but I didn't really hear full resolution in favor of the proposal in front of us at the moment. So I'd like us to take it to the list. Could you write the actual text you proposed for 4.1, and we'll review that on the list?
I thought there was pretty good consensus around, like, unifying on a single bundle group, just making sure we can tolerate multiple incoming bundle groups.
Well, I heard people also saying that they're still considering the transport use case that Harold raised and Magnus talked about putting audio and video into different ones. I'm willing to take a hum if you want one. So I'll ask 3 questions. One for, can you go back to the previous one? The last one. So there's a proposal here that's always one bundle group for all M lines, but to accept and behave sensibly if you get more than one bundle group, which is functionally accept one of them and unbundle the rest, or unbundle all of them if you care to. So I'm going to ask 3 questions. The question 1 is, are you in favor of this resolution? The second one is, do you oppose this resolution? And the third one was, do we need more discussion? So, if you are in...
I'm much, as an individual, Colin James, I much preferred Martin's proposal, which is you must support at least one bundle group, but you may support more than one to this. And this reads to me like you must do only one.
Yeah, you must, like, anything you generate.
Again, I like his much better.
Okay, then you should hum
There is
for
an API
oppose.
okay, we need, okay, all right.
Then you should either hum for oppose or
There's an
need-
API surface to do that we've agreed to, which is the Quas example I gave. And there, right? So we don't have an API surface for this is not true.
Okay.
We already have an API that forces us to need this.
I don't think we should take a hum.
Okay, given this, I also agree that we probably need some more discussion on the list. I will go back to asking the authors to generate what they propose the text for 4.1 should be and take it to the list. And now, the author of the FEC draft should step into the box.
Okay, so this was a individual draft the last time, now is a working group draft. Next slide. You got some good comments from a couple people. Thank you. A couple things that were changed specifically. There was some crazy stuff in there about what you could do to actually support Opus in Celt-only mode for FEC. It was kind of complicated. Tim wasn't sure if it actually would even work, and so it's been removed because Opus by default will sort of fall back to Silk mode when FEC needs to be engaged, at least in the JSF usage of it. There was some discussion we had the last time about whether we should allow for redundant use of G711 with that RFC 2198. We talked about removing it the last time. Someone actually specifically asked about it on the list, so it's been brought back. And also there's a question about FEC for data channels. Since the application controls what's actually being sent, we don't need to do anything at the wire level. If the application wants to do FEC on its own, though, and it's payloads that it's sending on unreliable data channels, it's free to do so. Next. So there's a couple comments I got about how is FEC actually done. And so with Unified Plan, we've said that FEC is something sent within the same RTP session, just on a different SSRC with the primary stream. And this is all independent of bundle or whatever. You could have a single primary stream being sent, and if you want to have FEC, that's not another M section. That's another SSRC within the same RTP session, the same M section as the primary stream. The one sort of downside of this is that it makes it such that if you want to have an FEC stream protect multiple primary streams, we don't have any way to do this. Now, I'm sure we could figure this out. But basically, right now we're sort of saying, for the purposes of FEC in this V10 of the Rtcweb docs, we're not going to try to deal with this problem. We'll have some basic FEC, and the cross M section FEC will be left for further study. All right, next slide. So just to be clear, here's the type of SDP that you might have if you're using Opus with in-band FEC for audio FEC, and using FlexFEC in Unified Plan way for video FEC. Okay. So open issues. Magnus raised the question of, what should we support? Basically, XOR FEC, some sort of separate FEC stream for audio. Right now, we're recommending that you use RFC 2198 and staple like a packet, the previous packet, onto the current packet when sending, and that allows you to recover one, or you can staple multiple packets if you wanted to, recover multiple packet losses with a bit rate increase of multiplying the bit rate by the number of packets that you're stapling on. The question is whether we should support this XOR sort of FEC where we could protect like 3 packets with a single packet. And so as long as you received at least 3 out of the 4 packets, you could then recover them all. The issue here is that you're adding a significant amount of delay that you can't basically recover the FEC until you've received the entire packet stream. And so it's not, the reason I left it out the first time was that this didn't seem like it was that interesting in a real-time application. that, since we already have this RFC 2198 mechanism that has a less delay, although with a greater bitrate overhead, it's not clear that you would actually want to use this multi-packet thing, because typically each audio frame is a single packet, in contrast to video where each frame will be many packets, and so this type of FEC protection of one packet protecting multiple packets actually makes sense. Colin.
Hi, Colin Perkins. So I have no real opinion on the question about the ULP FEC or whatever. For the 2198 redundancy, you don't necessarily need to use a redundant encoding, which is the same as the primary.
Sure, that's true.
So I don't recall exactly what wording you've used, but if you have negotiated multiple codecs, there's no reason you couldn't use a lower rate code.
That's actually discussed in the draft.
Yeah. So as long as there's wording in there, because that's not what you described, but as long as the draft allows the other, that seems reasonable.
Sure. I mean, I think this came up in the context of G711 redundancy, where basically there is no provision for doing lower rate G711.
Yeah, sure, but you could always use a different codec if you negotiated that.
Absolutely, yes. I agree. So the question is just, does anyone sort of see the need in their application for this, parity FEC or some other sort of mechanism for protecting, audio packets with a method other than 2198? All right, not seeing any excitement for that. All right, moving on. Security considerations. At first I sort of figured this is really not an issue. FEC has been discussed to death and security considerations. But I did actually come up with one scenario that might be, that Magnus sort of prompted me for, that might be kind of interesting, where we're always going to have congestion control when video is used. But not necessarily when audio is used. Like pretty much lots of things establish a PCMU session have no sense of congestion control whatsoever. It's not even required that you even have AVPF, which means you wouldn't even have support for circuit breakers. So the question is, like, could somebody send a, basically an offer for doing PCMU with like 5x redundancy and, no congestion control, and you would just start emitting like 5 times PCMU bandwidth onto the wire, and that sort of seemed like that could be somewhat problematic. Not hugely problematic, but perhaps worth saying that if you can't use RFC 2198 if you're not going to at least have circuit breakers.
Okay. How is that any different than the application deciding he's going to send 87 PCMU streams that are actually independent audio streams?
This may be sort of a subset of a more general
I think it
problem.
might be, yeah. So.
Yeah, okay, so I think that's probably not FEC specific. You probably have to say what we're going to do if we don't have, if we're generating audio streams without any sort of circuit breakers or congestion control, and that, I'm not sure exactly where that needs to live, perhaps RTP usage.
Hi, Colin Perkins. The RTP usage draft says you must implement the circuit breaker.
Well, you must implement circuit breakers. What if you're talking to someone who does not implement circuit breakers, like a, soft switch for PSTN telephony?
I mean, if the quality is dreadful, then, stop.
Right. I mean, basically, if you get an offer saying, please produce me like all these, PCMU streams, or one that has multiple redundant encodings, like what should you do if there's no circuit breakers?
So what you should do is that you must implement the circuit breaker, and when you get the RTCP coming back saying that you're getting high packet loss, you should give up.
They don't get any RTCP back because the other side doesn't support AVPF.
There's nothing AVPF related in the circuit breaker.
Well, okay, so there's no RTCP, so it's just sending you just for RTP.
So if you don't have any RTCP at all, then you can't do any form of congestion control.
That's my point. And so like
the same is true for video, and you shouldn't be sending to that thing in environments where you need to worry about it. I mean,
my understanding is there are plenty of things that don't send any RTCP at all that do PCMU.
Yeah, and if you have no feedback coming back, there's nothing you can do to detect there's a problem, and you just have to rely on the user hanging up the phone.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the question is are these things actually going to cause damage to the network by allowing some especially crafted SDP to allow you to dump a whole bunch of uncontrolled data onto the wire?
Yes, potentially.
I have a proposal for this.
I think it's okay. What we need to say is the FEC draft must say you can't use, if you implement FEC, you must also implement, whatever appropriate congestion control, right? Then when you're talking to some prehistoric device that only does AVP, which 711 audio, it won't support FEC, so you won't negotiate FEC and we'll be out of this quagmire.
I mean, the RFC 2198 already has some words in the security considerations about this.
Fantastic.
Magnus Westlund. I mean, my main concern, or thing, I just want to raise the saying that we actually should maybe document some potential issues, because in general I think what happens here is that FEC was going to expose a little bit more FreeSTP knobs that you can try to twist in the browser to get it to emit more useless data compared to useful data. Sure, I mean, supposedly congestion control, or at least circuit breaker control, etc. But still, it's moves the amount of junk which you might emit compared to useful data. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's a section where it talks about the adaptive nature that is required here. That the application doesn't get full concrete control over exactly what FEC is sent, and so the implementations need to make sure that they only send FEC when the conditions actually warrant it.
Yeah, appropriate amount of FEC. That's fine. So I think that resolves quite a lot of this.
Jonathan, the other thing that occurs to me is this ancient device that doesn't send any RTCP is also probably not doing ISR, DTLS, SRTP. So you're going through some gateway. Maybe these gateways should be mandated to also generate proper RTCP as well as generating proper everything else WebRTC requires. At which point you'll know from the gateway whether the audio is getting through or not.
Okay, so is that something that we'd be willing to sort of take on as a requirement for Rtcweb compatible devices, that they must support at least circuit breakers?
Well, I think they must. Yeah, they must send valid at least AVP RTCP. I think that's, because the RTP spec actually says you have to, and just the fact that people don't is, because they didn't feel like it.
They're lazy, yes.
So Keith Drake, if you want to do that, then you're definitely going to have to move gateways out of this bucket that says we're not going to do it yet.
So, Colin Perkins, please read the RTP usage draft. It already says you need to do all this stuff.
So, but that RTP usage, it governs what Rtcweb, endpoints have to do. I mean, is it...
Not just endpoints.
Well, I mean, does it mean that we don't interoperate with anything that doesn't follow? I mean, there will definitely be things that we interoperate with that don't follow every single thing inside Rtcweb, right? Or Rtcweb RTCP usage, like the header extensions that must be supported. Like not everything will necessarily that we interoperate with will support that. So like you're basically saying there's things that must implement and must use. And
right,
must use is not specified.
Are there actually, I mean, you keep talking about legacy devices, but you need legacy devices which implement DTLS, SRTP, and SRTP,
sure.
And they implement all of this, but not RTCP?
So this is, we're 2 minutes from the end. The line is closing after Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is that treat this as if you never get any RTCP, gosh, that means none of your packets got through at all. You better trigger your circuit breakers. which is what circuit breaker says. So
sure.
Basically, don't create an exception for never getting RTCP. Treat that like a circuit breaker says to do, which is, gosh, I must have a completely dead path. I better tear down.
Okay.
Okay, that's the end of today's session. A reminder for folks who are coming to tomorrow's session, there was some homework to be done by folks on the security issues raised. If you could produce slides and send them to the chairs when you can, we'd appreciate that. It does look like we're going to have a tight time tomorrow, given that we are going to try and shove in the security slides that are being produced between now and then, so please be prepared for us to go at a breakneck pace. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.
No, exactly.
Nothing you go for, Tom.
Luckily, we can void on.